Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1996 Pinnacle Aficionado baseball card set. Originally, I wanted to do this, in conjunction with another topic because it's a pretty simplistic affair. There's not a lot of complexity to the card set. There's not a lot going on. I mean, it's a card set with a parallel and 3 inserts. But I couldn't really put it with anything else too well because I didn't have enough time with the 1996 Pinnacle set because there was a lot to talk about. And it doesn't go with anything else because it's a part of a weird time in card collecting where there was just this big explosion of card sets that were being created left and right to fill out a card market where it was all about chasing something new, finding something new to sell to collectors, where the traditional guard of the sets that had been before needed to be very much enlivened so that people would find the new thing that nobody else had. And for Pinnacle, in 1993, 94, 95, they'd been expanding out, but they were making card sets that were distinct. They stood on their own. Card sets like Select and Select Certified were both their own distinct affairs. And even in 1996, they created Summit, which was technically Pinnacle Summit, but it was Summit. They had Zenith, which was technically Pinnacle Zenith, but it was really Zenith. And they had Pinnacle Mint, which, while being Pinnacle Mint, it was all about the coins. So it was mint. It was very, very distinct. But Pinnacle Aficionado was different because it was not a set that was designed to be a real standalone set. And Pinnacle would get really carried away with this in the years following because you'd have Express and you'd have Plus and Performances and Snapshots and Inside, but they were all Pinnacle Express, Pinnacle Plus, Pinnacle Performance, Pinnacle Snapshots, Pinnacle Inside. They weren't standalone sets. We know them as the Pinnacle Plus or Pinnacle Performers, or all of those names. It is Pinnacle this and Pinnacle that. It's all these little side things that Pinnacle was creating that didn't have the standalone distinction of Summit and Zenith and Certified that we saw with these other sets. Aficionado was the first place where Pinnacle started to do that, but they weren't the only ones. For instance, over in Topps, they did Topps Laser. And, well, Topps Gilt in football was very much a case where they created a card set that had no future. It was an interesting idea that only stood as a standalone. And Topps Laser was kind of the same way. Pinnacle Aficionado was very much the same way as well. It's weird, there are these card sets that were not designed with the structure of being a distinct standalone brand. It was more like some other stuff to collect. And in football, we had so much to collect, there wasn't a lot of room for that. Because we had companies like Collector's Edge and Playoff and Pro Line, which were only football. So for football, there was way too much to buy. You couldn't just dump a whole bunch of packs onto the market. But in baseball, it was a smaller group of card companies, and Don Russ had already kind of been doing this. So Pinnacle was making a bunch of little additional Pinnacle sets where once you've collected Pinnacle, you can also collect Pinnacle this and Pinnacle that, and it gave them the ability to do one-off sets, like Pinnacle Aficionado, that really didn't need to carry on their own. Aficionado was such a rousing success that there was no 1997 set. It was just a one and done, and it was very similar in many ways to the Topps Laser set. Because Aficionado was all about wood cards. Not just wooden cards, cards made of wood. The Topps Laser cards were done that way, but that's because the laser die cutting needed a firm cardstock. But over in Aficionado, that was the whole point. It was, hey, these cards are made of wood, and they feel that way. When you pick it up, it's thicker than you would normally assume, but not playoff level thickness. It's kind of a mid-range. It's not too distinctive, but boy, these cards are firm. I mean, they are rock solid. They have a feel to them that just doesn't feel like a card. And for Aficionado, that is the core base of why it exists. Now, the card design itself is a horizontal design, and it has a sepia shot of the player in action. And then on the side, it has a holofoil field with the outline of a player portrait with little divots in it to create the texturing for the player portrait. And then they have a wooden box over on the side, and they have some gold foil for the player name. But it's that field over on the side of holofoil, that's the really significant part of this card because it's actually slightly raised. So when you feel the card, you actually feel all that texture on it, and it feels different than you would expect with any other card. And then when you flip the card over, you literally have to flip it over in a horizontal format rather than a vertical flipping, because it's designed well so that on card pages, when you flip from one side to the other, everything reads, even though the orientation is off. But when you're handling the cards individually and you turn the card over, you got to remember you're turning it over in a way that's different than you normally do. Kind of throws you off. But the card back, it has a portrait of the player, it has some fairly difficult to read stats, but the big thing, or I should say unusually oriented stats, but the big thing you might notice is that the chipping on these cards is notorious because the construction of the card is not well designed for manufacturing. And if they had a second year, they might have figured this out. But with only 1 year, chipping is a major problem with these cards because it's just, again, it's a block of wood. This is not what card companies are used to dealing with, and so it didn't come out very cleanly. Now, the card I've been talking about is the veteran cards, which is the first 100 cards out of this 200 card set. And I want to pause for a second because they did a preview set of cards, or not a preview set as much as they did preview versions of the veteran players, which are the first 100 cards, which are done exactly the same way as the regular cards in the set, except they use gold holofoil on the card for not just the portrait, the outline portrait, but also for the player name. And then it says first pitch preview on the side of the card. So these are only the veteran cards that show up with this card, with this approach. And the cards are very, very difficult to come by. They're pretty rare overall. And so only the top 100 cards are this way, but in packs, they did have a parallel, and it's score Pinnacle, so the parallel obviously is artist proof. But this is all 200 cards come with the artist proof. Now the artist proof is quite simply, they have a little gold foil that says artist proof, and they have a gold foil nib on it, and that is the only thing that changes. Nothing on the back, it's just straightforward silver holofoil. But those, like I said, that's the whole set, and so we've talked about enough about the veterans. The second half starts off with rookies, which are designed the same way, except they're flipped around. So the portrait and the action shot are on opposite sides, but you'll notice that the action shot for the rookies is a full color shot. It's not sepia. Sepia is only for the veterans. The rookies all have a normal color shot. And then they have a subset called Global Reach. This is a vertical oriented card, and this is looking at players who came from different countries. In this case, the whole background is holofoil, except they have a black surface that they put on for all the printing for the globe. And here's the thing that's interesting. That is the same relief that we had for the holofoil. But in this case, it's much more pronounced. It's almost like sandpaper in a way. The relief is much more distinctive, especially because you have all the lines from the globe, which give you these thin bands. So this is a card, when you feel it, it's unlike any card you're going to find anywhere. It really does feel almost delicate, like it's going to kind of break off. It is very distinct, and it really doesn't quite feel like a normal card, almost like there's something wrong with this card. But it is truly a distinctive set. You're not going to find hardly anything like this in cards. Very unusual. And then they close the set out with a couple of checklist cards. And this is veteran players, where they have portrait on one side, and then they have the action shot of the veteran in color. So the only veteran cards with a full action shot in color are the checklist cards, an arc along the boundary between the two that says checklist. And so every checklist card has a different player on it, and that is the set. Now, I've talked a lot about this set, but really it's very simple. You got veterans with sepia, you got rookies with regular full color shots, you have the global reach cards with the whole background is all of this effect, and you have checklists. You have the parallels that are in artist proof, and that's it, and some preview cards. They don't have any SP cards and they don't have any other parallels, but they do have 3 inserts. And the first insert is Magic Numbers. Now, Magic Numbers is, shock of all shocks, a wood card. Only in this case, it's designed entirely around being wood. So instead of being like a small block of wood, in this case, it's more like a wood shaving. A lot closer to what we saw over in Ultra. For this card, it's all about the texture of the wood and then the printing on top of that. So this is a card that literally is intended to seem like a card made of wood. That's the whole point. And it's a card that does have a tendency to warp because of the fact that it's not treated really in any way. It's much more prone to the natural wants of a thin piece of wood. They also have a set called Slick Picks. This is a card that's much more like the cards in the set, where you have an action shot of the player that's a cutout, and then the whole rest of the card is holofoil with a portrait of the player in that. And there's a slight relief to the player popping out just around the outside. Otherwise, this is a card that is all about the holofoil. But the big one, the insert that's really significant, is called Rivals. And Rivals is something that Pinnacle did not just here. Over in football, it was Pinnacle Disguise. And the idea is that you have a couple of players and they show up in different combinations. Now for Rivals here, you got all the holofoil around the outside. You'll notice there are 2 players on the front. But the thing about this card is, about this card set is it's basically 2 halves. It's a 24 card set, but there are 12 cards at the front with 1 set of players, and then another 12 cards, 13 through 24, with another set of players. So for every player, there are 4 players in each group. So in each case, like with here, we have Jeff Bagwell and Barry Bonds, but we also have Barry Bonds and Jeff Bagwell. There are 2 cards with that combination. Likewise, we have a card with Piazza and Barry Bonds, and a card with Barry Bonds and Piazza. And similarly, we have a card with Tony Gwynn and Barry Bonds, and a card with Barry Bonds and Tony Gwynn. So that means that of the second half of the set, 13 through 24, there are 6 cards with Barry Bonds, 3 different cards, 2 of each. So there's Bonds and Bagwell, Bonds and Piazza, Bonds and Gwynn. There's also Bagwell and Piazza, Bagwell and Gwynn, and Piazza and Gwynn. Likewise, in the first half of the set, the 4 players are Frank Thomas, Ken Griffey Jr., Cal Ripken Jr., and Mo Vaughn. So in each case, each player shows up on a quarter of the set, which is pretty impressive overall. And if you're a card collector who goes after either a player or a team, that's a lot of cards for you to collect. But it also makes a very interesting set because of the fact that it's nice that they're all on the front, but the complexity of how the set is laid out is really pretty fun and very distinct about this card set. And that's what we've got for Pinnacle Aficionado. So it's not the most complex set, it's not the biggest set, not by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a surprising amount to talk about because of how unusual this card set is. This is truly one of those many, many one-offs that could only have happened in the 1990s, and it's a lot of fun that they created it, but it's also not the kind of card set that's really going to draw you in and just get you fascinated. It just doesn't really have that nature to it. But it certainly is an interesting stop to make on this journey through cards. So, thank you very much for watching the video. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I do urge you to do so because I love 90s cards and I'm exploring everything about main release cards in the 90s, plus some of the odd stuff that goes in there also. So I'm covering all this stuff, and if you haven't explored the cards, the different videos of different topics that I've done, check them out because there's some really fun ones. And other than that, thank you very much for watching.